Hi, everyone. I'm Adriana Reyes. I am at Cornell as an assistant professor in the School of Public Policy, as you can see by my branded slides here. And I'm going to be talking about caregiver preference alignment. So I think, as many of us know, the population is aging rapidly, and we also know that 56% of older adults are going to need some form of caregiving assistance in their lifetime, but we have limited support for those from the government. And we also know at the same time that a lot of older adults prefer to age in place. This is a well-known, preference for older adults that they want to stay in their own home. And this is either that they want family or paid help as their preferred option when they have self-care or mobility. And across many different studies, adults generally don't think living with an adult child is a preferred option. So older adults want care in their own home with somewhat of a divide depending on um, the question on whether or not this is from family or professional, but they clearly want the care in their own home. And only when the needs are high does it shift towards more institutional settings. But most of these surveys, we're only asking older adults. So we're asking older adults what they want for their own care. And this, makes sense. We want to know what they prefer. We have data from NHATS of 65 and older. The long-term care poll starts asking at 40, so slightly younger. And NHIS has some questions that are 40 to 65. But we don't know what their kids want. This is something that is largely we haven't really asked these types of questions. We know, again, we have this information on what older adults want, what are their preferences, but a lot of times their preferences are to have family care. And that is a big preference, very low preferences for nursing homes or, formal care settings. And so even though a large number of people are saying that they want their family to take care of them, we don't know really what their kids want. And we do have some information, and we try to make some understanding of family availability of, how close are their kids and are they, in a position where they could provide care. But we don't know exactly what they want and what they think is how their parents should receive care. And this, may be important because there is some evidence of generational differences across different aspects. Across filial obligations, they are pretty common and they are pretty consistent across generations and intergenerational studies, with this being fairly stable. But importantly, these obligations may not translate into care. So even though people might have, strong values of family, that may not always mean that they think they'll be in a position or they want to take care of their family for, family caregiving. And also data from the General Social Survey shows that as people get older, they are less likely to think that sharing a home with their grown children is a good idea. The question is, as you know, many older people share a home with their grown children. Do you think this is generally a good idea or a bad idea? And as you can see here, this is, a fairly high support in the earlier ages, and then this kind of steadily declines to quite low support for the oldest age groups here. So again, it kind of shows there are these differences in what people think is right for care. And this, kind of goes with this idea of where should they be receiving care. So in the current study, I'm going to be asking and kind of answering this question of what do adult children want for their parents, and looking at some variation across groups. And then I'll try to match this up with what parents want for themselves, although we don't have a perfect match yet. So the main data I'm going to be presenting is data from the Verisight Omnibus survey. It was fielded in 2025 as an online survey, 18 and over US residents. And there are about 980 people who have a non-missing answer to the question that I'll be presenting. And so the question is that I'll be analyzing is, if your parent developed a health limitation that made it difficult for them to take care of themselves independently, what would be your preferred care arrangement for them? With the options being to stay in their own help with help from you, stay in their home with professional help, live with you, live in an assisted living community, or live in a nursing home. And I'll be comparing this with some data from the National Health and Aging Trend Study, in 2018, they had a question that was, imagine a person named Pat who was 80 years old with health problems. Because of these problems, she needs someone to help with bathing, dressing, and getting around inside. What would be best for Pat? And as you may recall from the previous slide, the responses are fairly matched here, where the responses are living in their own help with help from friends, family, their own help with someone paid to come in, an adult living with an adult child, living in an assisted living facility, or living in a nursing home. So here we have a pretty good match on the response categories, although the difference is that this is for a hypothetical person, not for themselves. There is some data from long-term care poll that I'll also look at. In the event that you needed ongoing living assistance someday, if you could choose, who would be your first choice for providing that care? And here to try to kind of match with the other response categories, kind of collapse it to be friend, family, or professional services. But the response categories that they're given really aren't a great match. I'm mainly just going to be presenting some descriptive results today, just to look at some of these patterns across these categories and how they differ across the surveys. So first, kind of the main results from this question in the VeriSite, asking adult children, what do they want for their parents? We see that there are, pretty varied responses, but a pretty, the three most common are stay in their own help with help from you, stay in their own help with professional help, and then live with you is actually the one that gets the most support, and then live in an assisted living community and as being the fourth, and living in a nursing home being kind of the least preferred option. This is kind of in line again with these previous studies that think that younger adults are thinking co-residence is a pretty good idea for how to help parents, and then also this idea that living in a nursing home tends to be unpopular for a lot of Americans. Some, educational differences, looking at high school or less, some college and more. We do see that people who are less educated, have less education, are more likely to support this idea of having their parents live with them, as well as having this idea of providing the help themselves. Whereas people with a college or more are more likely to say that that their parent should get professional help or move into an assisted living community as good options. And so we do see some educational differences, and this may reflect like opportunity costs or work, the work opportunities or ability to provide that care, as well as the financial resources available to provide professional care. There's also some race differences. Mostly here we see this with the difference between non-Hispanic Black and Hispanic adults thinking that having their parent come live with them is a much preferred option relative to whites in another category. And then this is kind of flipped here with a stay in their own home professional help, where Black and Hispanic respondents are much less likely to think that's a good option compared to the non-Hispanic white and other. So there, so similar to previous, literature, we do see some differences in the preferences across race and ethnicity in some of these differences. Not too much in terms of gender. We did look at the gender, I did look at the gender differences, and staying in their own help with help from you. Women are slightly more likely to prefer that, as well as live with you, and men are more likely to think that living in an assisted living community is a good idea. So this may also just reflect that, women are more likely to be doing this care, and so they maybe are also more open to doing it as well. So now moving to the generational comparisons. So this is where I'm going to compare to these other two data sets that I mentioned earlier. So first, comparing what the adult children want for their parents, that's in red, with the enhanced data, this hypothetical older adult is in gray. We can really see, the big difference that really sticks out is this difference in location of where the care is received, where adults, again, as I mentioned earlier, really see their parent living with them as being a good option. But this is really not what older adults say that they think is good for this hypothetical older adult Pat. The very low, a very low proportion of people select that as the first option in the and hats, they're given, they can choose a second option, but the first option is not to go and live with their adult children. That's very low um, compared to what adults are thinking is good for their parent to do. And actually, we also see that for this hypothetical older adult, there's more of a preference for living in an assisted living community compared to living with an adult child. And so you see some of these differences in where the care is being received and these preferences between these two generations. So there's some racial differences here that I also want to kind of point out. I know there's kind of a lot going on here. The co-residence gap is, present across all the different samples. But there is a larger gap in the stay in their own home with help from family. And we see that gap and that difference between what the adult children want and what the parents want is a little bit is highest for the Hispanic group in for that category. And again, you also see that all the groups have this difference in live with you choices. And so again, I think this is, really shows that these groups are having to have different preferences and that these preferences may be even larger in for certain groups. So I think this is a kind of important to kind of understand what's motivating these differences and how do we understand, and how can we think about kind of closing these gaps between what parents and adult children kind of think is the preference, or what are options that everyone can agree on. So now moving to some comparison with the long-term care poll. Although, again, we have to really kind of collapse down the categories. The advantage is the long-term care poll asks people what they want for themselves. And here we see that there is, in the red, so on the left side is for parents, and on the right is what people want for themselves in the long-term care poll. And we see that, family and friends is kind of over and above what people want and say they want for themselves, with over 70% of respondents choosing a family or a friend as being who they want. Whereas when you look at for parents, only about slightly over 50% are saying that that's what their preference would be for them to provide that care. So this really does start to show a greater kind of mismatch in this, who's going to be providing the care, not just the location, versus what we saw in the NHATS comparison. And, just thinking that people might be thinking family, they might be thinking a spouse. So I did an additional comparison here where I looked only at single adults, thinking that maybe people who are saying family and friends are primarily thinking about a spouse as being the one providing the care. And even looking at only those who are single and don't have a spouse or partner, we still see a pretty big gap where, again, over 65% of those who are single are still saying they prefer family and friends, where only about 55% of adults are saying that they want to be the one kind of providing that care. And then I did this too, I also broke this out by race and ethnicity as well. And the patterns are, pretty similar as what we see overall, but we do see slightly higher preferences for family for themselves among the Hispanic subsample. But otherwise, the results are really not that different than what we see overall for this. And here, the family and friends is red and the professional services is gray. So we don't see huge racial and ethnic differences here. Some of the key points that I want to highlight are that, over half of adult children would like to help their parent with needed care in one way or another. So it does show that, adult children are willing and prefer to be helpers with care needs. And this matches what older adults want largely in terms of, who's providing the care for a hypothetical older adult, but not for themselves. So when adults are asked what do they want or who do they want to be providing the care for themselves, it's actually a little bit higher of people preferring a family or a friend. And so this form of help does not, always match the preferences. And we also know the location doesn't match and that parents do not want to live with their adult children. But a lot of adult children think that would be the best way for them to help their parents. And so these preferences are, relatively aligned with big differences being, where the care is delivered. And we do see differences with white and college educated children being more likely to want professional help. And these children may also be less likely to live close and matches with some research that we've already seen. And so this kind of is similar to what we've seen in other work. And older adults often value this independence and not wanting to be a burden on their children, which may explain this difference in co-residence, where a lot of parents older adults want to maintain their independence for as long as possible. There are some limitations. So there is there is a forced choice here. We don't allow, for both family and professional care, which, as we heard in the previous, presentation, is something that is happening. And a lot of people do end up having some hybrid family and professional care, but we can't ascertain that preference. The questions don't align perfectly, especially the long-term care poll where the categories are different. But then the advantage is that it is asking about what older adults want for themselves. The other limitation is that we're not looking at real dyads. This is just two different, these are from two different surveys and two different kind of groups of two different populations, just of different ages. So parents and their children may have different preferences. I think, the upcoming HRS experimental module on preferences will provide a good comparison when the data is out to give us more information on how these preferences, what older adults want for themselves. And the question category should align more similar with this Vericite data. And then Sarah and I have also, this is kind of similar, is building on this, we have a R1 that we just submitted that's also going to be trying to look at these differences in generational preferences along with other things as well. So with that, thank you. Thanks to Sarah, who's my longtime collaborator, and then also my undergraduate research assistant who worked on this, Lilia Mitra, who just graduated from Cornell. So thanks.